Hi everybody, looks like there's about 3 of you in here now. If one of you wouldn't mind just confirming in the chat box that you can hear me. Great, thanks. Alright, well I'll go ahead and jump right in. It's not quite 2 o'clock, but this is recorded, so... This review session is going to be focused on the first chunk of JavaScript that we teach at Codify Academy. As far as the coursework is concerned, it's going to be focused on weeks 7 through 10. I'm going to try to make it all the way through 10. I might only make it to 9. Whatever I don't make it to in this session will be covered in the next one. Beyond that, I don't fully intend to stick 100% to the course material in strict order, which is to say, I'm definitely going to code along with it. We are going to work through the exercises, but there are times throughout my presentation of this material where I'm probably going to jump onto tangential points just in order to relay to all of you guys certain conceptual concepts relating to JavaScript and JavaScript logic, which are not necessarily taught in the natural course of the course material that we have. And that's a result of the fact that we're a boot camp. We can't teach you everything. We give you the tools to get you on the right path, get you on the right foot, and you yourself are going to have to use those tools to fill in any gaps that you leave with. So that is an important thing to consider. You cannot just kind of go through this course with blinders on, seeing only what is in front of you. If you do, you're not going to be very competitive as an applicant in the job market when you graduate. So I'm going to try to address certain things that you don't naturally come across in the course here. It will be recorded. I would suggest going back over it again on your own at some point, because I'm probably going to be moving it a little bit of a clip, a little quickly, that is. Alright, so let's just go ahead and get started. We are starting in week 7. By this point, I'm assuming all of you have Bootstrap, jQuery, and your custom main.js JavaScript sheet hooked up to your HTML template. Hooked up your template and the HTML file inside of your template. So you should have at minimum one. Ooh, I don't need that InstaFeed plugin. Apologies. You should have at minimum 4 script tags at the bottom of your body and 2 link tags at the top of your HTML document in your head. Not inside your body, in your head. Okay? 1 link for Bootstrap, 1 link for main.css, 1 script for jQuery, 1 script for Popper, 1 script for Bootstrap, 1 script for main.js. I'm inevitably going to get at least one of you asking me, what the hell is Popper and why do we have it? Well, once again, and this is going to be the last time I say it, Popper comes with Bootstrap. So if you went to getbootstrap.com and copied the 3 scripts in the JS section, you have Popper. If you don't know if you have Popper, look before you ask me. Okay, it says it right here. You can hit Control F or Command F and type in Popper, and it will take you to everywhere in your document where it says Popper. Okay, if you do not have Bootstrap hooked up to your HTML and your template for whatever reason, you should absolutely do that. That said, I'm not going to rely on Bootstrap for this review session, so just make sure you have your main.js hooked up correctly in a script tag that should look identically to this. If it does not look identical to this, your template is not set up correctly. And if your template is not set up correctly, you absolutely must go all the way back and set up your template correctly. Once more, the file path for this script is not in an href like our link tags. It's in a source attribute, src, just like an image. and the relative file path is pointing to the JS folder, which you can see right here, and the main.js file inside that JS folder. Alright, so I'm going to leave it at that. This main.js folder is again where we will write all of our JavaScript. Let me double check. Mine is empty, my CSS is empty, my body is empty. We're good to go. So, week 7. What is a variable? Explain in your own words. A variable is really nothing more than an empty unit for storing data of any kind. You can store anything in a variable. A variable is just an empty box for storing data into memory. And the reason why we would ever need to store data into memory, this does not store things like usernames or user passwords or data which a visitor to your site might enter. It doesn't do that. It stores things, data which you might need to call upon and use in the future. It's also a useful method of storing a shorthand for targeting certain elements in your HTML. And we will get into this as we move forward. But I need to stress that difference. It doesn't store dynamic user-generated info. It stores milestones or anchor points or specific pieces of data which you know you're going to require in your code. Take a look at what that means. Number 2, what is an array? Explain in your own words. An array is a list of items. In JavaScript, an array is always going to look or be indicated by these square brackets. Okay? And I need to stress that an array is a list. And the reason why I need to stress that is because a number of students think of an array as a collection of things. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's completely true. But the reason why I stress that an array is a list is because every item, every data point, anything that is contained in an array has its own numbered index. Okay? And they proceed in numerical order. So this "and" here is at the 0 index. That's the first item. This array is at the first index, the second item. Is the second index, the third item. A is the third index and the fourth item. And list is the fifth item, but it's at the fourth index. So indexes are 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it has a total of 5 items. So that's my point. An array is more like an ordered list in that regard. Every item inside the array has a number which you can use to refer to that particular item in the array. Okay, once again, a variable is just an empty box in which you can store anything. An array is a list of items. An array can be empty. You can declare an array and just leave it empty for future use. An array can have mixed types of variables inside of it. It doesn't need to be all of one type of variable. We'll talk about that more in a second. Explain in very simple terms what a for loop does. A for loop is by far the most complicated bit of JavaScript we'll be engaging with pretty much in this entire review session. So from week 7 to 10, a for loop is the most complex piece of JavaScript you will engage with. And what a for loop does, in very simple terms, is it allows you as a developer to run a chunk or a block of code multiple times. It allows you to run a chunk of code multiple times, and if you would like, each time you run that code, it can be slightly different. We're going to dive pretty deeply into for loops over the course of the next 2 to 3 hours, so I'm going to leave it there for now. For loop allows you to repeat chunks of code. Now, what does console.log do? Pretty straightforward. Console.log logs information to the console. So here is a console.log command in which I am logging this message contained in strings, contained in quotes, to the console. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to save. I'm going to load my page, and notice we see nothing because your console is not going to be visible to visitors to your site. We need to open the inspector, and next to the Elements tab in our inspector is the Console tab. If I click here, I see my message, console.log logs information to the console. Okay, and if I want, I can also log variables and their values to the console. So up here, I defined a variable. I declared the variable myArray and defined it as this array of strings. Well, now I should see it logged in my console after my first console log message. And there it is, an array, indicated by those square brackets. Okay, group discussion questions, where we can really get into the meat of all of this. What are 3 ways to display JavaScript? Well, we already saw one of them, console.log. This is displayed using JavaScript. Another method is document.write. This is also displayed using JavaScript, but we won't be using this method very often. Turn on word wrap. And the difference between console.log and document.write can be seen here. This is displayed using JavaScript as the method printed to my console, and the message printed to my console inside of my console.log command. Document.write, this is also displayed using JavaScript, but we won't be using this method very often, is the message contained within my document.write command, and it is written directly into my HTML document. Now, this is important. If you see this, you have to investigate it. Okay? Even if there's no mystery here, you can clearly see the difference between document.write and console.log right here, right now. You need to dig a little deeper. You need to see what is under the hood. You're trying to be professional developers, so it's essential that you do not just leave it at this. You need to be able to tell me more precisely, what does document.write do? What does console.log do? Well, console.log, we can see it logs a message into our console. But how exactly does document.write write onto our document? To explore that, we need to go into our Elements tab. Let's open up our body element. Zoom out a touch. And here our body's still empty. Here's the scripts, which if you look at my index.html, my scripts are all at the very bottom of my body tag. But if I scroll down, I can see the text that was written to my document. So what it's doing is actually writing this text at the very bottom of my body. And I can try this again, document.write. New message. Let's reload. Now we have 2 document.write commands. Unfortunately, there's no line break, there's no distinction, they're not wrapped in HTML elements, so there's no formatting involved, and that's a danger of document.write you should be aware of. But it's important to understand what document.write is actually doing. It takes text or the value of a variable that you put in here, and it literally just puts it at the very bottom of your body. No HTML tag, no formatting, no styling, nothing. Okay, so that's 2 methods of displaying JavaScript. The third is alert. This is also a product of JavaScript. Let's see what an alert does. If I reload, I get a pop-up that says, this page says, this is also a product of JavaScript. It's just a blank pop-up window with an OK button. That's all. That's all that alert does. Alright, what is the difference between alert and prompt? Well, we saw alert. Prompt normally involves asking a user a question, like, what's your name? When I reload my page, I get a pop-up with this input field where I can actually type in, my name is Evan, or Evan. Problem is, when I click OK, it disappears, and nothing is done with that information. My name, Evan, is not stored anywhere. I can't use it. I can't do anything with it. In order to take full advantage of something like a prompt, you normally need to store it in a variable. And then I can, for example, print it to the console. So I'm going to write a prompt and store it in a variable, the name username. So the username is now going to store whatever a user types in responding to this prompt. And then I console.log whatever a user typed in, stored in the username variable, and concatenate that with a string. Blank has visited this site, space has visited this site. So username has visited this site is what we should see in our console. Ooh. Missed a parenthesis somewhere. There we go. Okay, what's your name? I'm going to say my name is Evan, capital E. Select OK. And now it says Evan has visited this site in my console. Without this variable, without declaring the variable username and storing the value of prompt in that variable, two things are going to happen. One thing is going to happen, one thing is not going to happen. One, we're going to get a prompt, and nothing is going to happen with my name. It's not going to show up in the console the way I expect. Number two, we get an error. Username is not defined. What that means is the browser runs into this username variable and expects that this is some variable that we need to define. This is exactly that, a variable that we need to define. The browser does not recognize it, and so when it runs across it and doesn't recognize it, it throws an error and all of your JavaScript just stops. It stops. So that means that we need to define username. But even if we did, our username, just declared it, leave it empty, we're still not going to see our name, or my name in this case, pop up in the console, because the value of that prompt, the answer which I type in, is not being stored in that variable. One thing that I could do here is I could take this whole prompt command and just drop it in the console. Now, what's your name? Evan. Evan has visited this site. Now it will work. And that's one of the beauties of JavaScript. One of the beautiful things is how you can condense code if you really need to. It's not always the best practice, and it can make your code unwieldy, but it's a good thing to know. You can usually turn 3 lines of code into 2. All right. What are 4 variable types? Well, the important ones are a number. Let me do this in the comments. There's a number, which is 1, or 2, or 12, or 18. We all know what a number is. There's a string, which is anything in quotes. Even if it's a number. like this. This 20, wrapped in quotation marks, is a string. It is not a number. Your text editor should help you identify. If it's one color, it's a number. If it's the same color as all the rest of its strings, it's probably a string. As long as there are quotes wrapped around something, it will be read as a string, and a string is read as pure raw text. Okay? Which means as far as the browser is concerned, this 20 has no numerical value that it can use in any kind of mathematical sense. I can't add 4 to this and expect to get 24 as a result. Real quick, this backspace here is just my method of, it's called escaping the apostrophe in IT''S. Because if I didn't have that backspace, well, it would consider this quote mark to be the counterpart of this one, and that's not right. So I escape it, which also makes it read as just raw text with that backspace. If I wanted to be really clean about it, I would actually have made these double quotes, and I could just keep that one as is. In JavaScript, if you use double quotes or single quotes, it makes no difference to the code. You just need to be consistent. You can't mix it up. You can't use one double quote and one single quote. That will break things. Okay, so this is a number. These are strings. Then there's a Boolean. And a Boolean is either true or it's false. It's a binary variable. It's either true or it's false. It is nothing else. It has a value of true, value of false, nothing in between. And then, of course, there is an array, which we already know. Looks like this. This is an array of numbers. This is an array of strings. And this is an array of Boolean values, of Booleans. You can also have an array of arrays if you really wanted to. That's when things can get fairly complicated. Not that you should shy away from it if you ever need to do that. Okay, so here I have one array, which actually contains an array of numbers, an array of strings, and a Boolean value. That's an array. Other variable types that you're primitive data types that you're likely to run into is going to be undefined and null. You don't need to worry too much about these just yet, but undefined is something you're going to run into a lot whenever you have a variable that you haven't declared, or you try to target a data point that has not been previously defined, or that the browser can't figure out what it is, or that doesn't exist. Undefined is the message, value, or error that you're going to get whenever the browser cannot figure out what you're trying to ask it to target. When the browser is confused, or when there's something wrong with your code, you will get undefined. Null, on the other hand, means nothing. Okay, null is deliberately nothing, and that can be a tough distinction to wrap your head around. But undefined is more useful when considering that it tends to pop up when you run into errors. Null is something that actually means nothing. Maybe something can have a value of null, and it's not going to break your code. Maybe you want it to have a value of null. Maybe you want it to have a value of null until a certain condition is met. Maybe it has a value of null because you removed something early in your code. Null does not inherently mean there's an error in your code, or you're looking for something that is not there. You might, in fact, be looking for something that has now deliberately been set to have a value of nothing. That is null and undefined in a very simple nutshell. Don't worry too much about those just yet, though. We're going to see plenty of them. What is concatenation and what does it do? Let's jump into the console for this one. A concatenation really just means combining data. of any kind. So I can, for example, concatenate two numbers, 8 plus 9, and it returns a value of 17, also a number. I can also concatenate two strings, Evan plus Winston, and it returns a concatenated string, a string. Notice that it doesn't naturally know that there's a space between these two strings. So if I try to combine 3 plus different plus words, they are all going to be combined without spaces. So something to keep in mind when concatenating strings is that you need to account for that. I might need to do. So Kruti just asked me what is the true purpose of null then. I'll get to that, I promise. But let's work through these discussion questions first. So you're going to need to account for these spaces in concatenating strings. Like I might need to do something like 3 space plus different space plus words. Something like, I left out a quote at the end there. Words. And then it will read correctly. Or I might need to do Evan plus space plus Winston. It's an important thing to remember when you are concatenating data, or concatenating variables, or concatenating strings. However you want it to read in the console, or if you're pushing it to your actual HTML document, it needs to be meaningful in some way. It needs to be readable by users. If it's not, then it's just a big hot mess. So you need to, it's as important as knowing what data you're handling, you need to know how to handle it. Even if it's something as simple as first and last name. So let's do a quick example. Var first name equals prompt. What is your first name? Var last name equals prompt. What is your last name? Okay, and then after a user answers both of those questions, I'm going to document.write first name plus space plus last name. So let's try it. What is your first name? Evan. What is your last name? Winston. We get Evan Winston printed to the document. You might also have something like welcome space plus first name, last name. So let's try again. What is your first name? Evan. What is your last name? Winston. Welcome, Evan Winston. Okay, so if I didn't have these spaces, let's try it without, it would just be very sloppy, as you might imagine. It would be sloppy, it wouldn't look professional, and it would make the text that we're reading considerably less meaningful to a user, especially if this information was more complicated than my own first and last name. So concatenating strings, that's something you need to be aware of. Let's keep trying a couple of other examples though. What if I tried to concatenate a number and a string? Well, we're going to get a string. The whole statement, after it's evaluated, becomes a string. I get 8 string. Okay, so what do you think I'm going to get if I try to concatenate a number and a number contained in a string? We get 88. This is also very important to consider because sometimes you will be dealing with numbers, sometimes you will be dealing with strings. You need to be aware at all times of what type of data you're dealing with, what your functions are going to return. You need to stay on top of all of that, and if you're ever not sure, call your variables in your console and see what exactly is being returned. So if I have a variable, my variable equals, and it's going to be 16 plus 24 plus 99 plus 12. If I hit some expression that evaluates some value which is being stored inside the variable named myVariable, then if I didn't know what it was, I could call it in my console like this. Just type in the name of the variable, and when I hit enter, it will return exactly what it evaluates to. And as we can see, it evaluates to something we might not expect, 13912. So what did it do? It added 16 plus 24 plus 99, which evaluated to 139, and then it added this string, 12, which stringified the whole expression, and it returns a string containing 13912. Things like that you need to stay on top of. It takes practice and takes experience, but it's just something to bear in mind. And while I'm on that subject, I don't want you to try to walk away from this review session having memorized everything that I do. That is not really the point of what I'm going for here, and that is not really going to help you with JavaScript. I don't want you to memorize the code that I type, or strictly the methods that I use. I want you to try to interpret the logic that I follow when I solve problems using JavaScript. Try to internalize how I approach problems, what kinds of concepts I'm trying to keep in mind to anticipate problems down the road. I want you more to get into the right frame of thinking than to walk away from this knowing a few new functions. Okay? Alright. What is an if conditional test for? Well, an if conditional tests whether a given statement is true or false. That's all. Okay? An if tests if a statement is true or false. And an if statement is going to look like this. If, let's do 8 is greater than 0, and then curly braces, do stuff. The way this is going to be interpreted by the browser is it's going to see this if statement, and then it's going to evaluate the statement inside the parentheses. 8 is greater than 0. Is that true or false? Well, 8 is greater than 0, so that's going to evaluate to true. And if that statement is true, it's going to look inside the curly braces, and it's going to do stuff. It's going to do whatever code is located inside the curly braces. So if we had a statement like if 8 is less than 0, well, that's clearly going to evaluate to false, and we're never going to reach this code. This code inside the curly braces is never going to be read, it's never going to be executed, because this statement is false, and it will always be false. 8 is never going to be less than 0. An else statement is going to contain code which will run if the if statement evaluates false. So in this case, this does in fact evaluate false. This code is never run. We jump to the else statement, and we run this code automatically. If the if statement evaluates false, we're going to run the code inside the else statement. The else is our fallback code. If there is no else statement, we will do nothing. If there is no else statement, we will do nothing. If the if statement evaluates true, then we will not run the else statement code. If the if statements evaluate true, we're going to run that if statement, and we're going to skip the code inside the else statement. Okay? Some tricky situations you might run into with if statements is, if you have an if statement, let's just say it evaluates true, you're going to run this code, right? And if you have an else statement after that if statement, which evaluates true, we're not going to run this code. That makes sense. It's pretty self-explanatory. But what if you have an if statement, evaluates true, not going to put anything inside it. An if statement that evaluates true, and after that you have an if statement that also evaluates true. Call this one do stuff. We'll call this one do more stuff. Well, we're going to evaluate this if statement, returns true, and we're going to do stuff. Then we're going to come to this second if statement, evaluate it, returns true, and we're going to do more stuff. So in a situation like this, we're going to do both. We're not going to read that this one evaluates true and then skip the next if statement. They're not connected. It's not like an else statement, which is dependent upon whether or not its preceding if statement returns true or false. This else statement is connected to this if statement, but these two if statements are independent. Okay? That's important to consider. If you have multiple if statements, they will all be independently assessed. This is different than, say, an else if statement. Do this stuff instead. If you have an else if statement and your if statement evaluates to false, then you're going to jump to the next else if statement, run that condition, and if it evaluates true, you're going to do the code in there. If it also evaluates false, then you're going to jump to the else statement, or you're going to do nothing if there is no else statement, or if there's another else if statement, you're going to check that one, etc., etc., etc. So if you see an else, that's when that condition, or the code inside, is dependent upon whether or not its parent if statement, for lack of a better way to put it, evaluates true or false. But you can have as many independent if statements as you'd like, and they will all independently evaluate. I hope that wasn't more confusing than it needed to be. Alright, list 8 comparison operators. Well, we've got greater than, we've got equal to, less than, greater than, equal to, less than, equal to, equals, equals, triples, equals, restrict equality, it's not equal, not double equal, etc., etc., etc. Is that even 8? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That is 8. Those are our comparison operators, and most of them speak for themselves. The only ones I really want to address are comparing what single equals, double equals, and triple equals do. It is important to consider that single equals does not behave like an equal sign in mathematics, and you have to get out of the habit of seeing it that way when you see a single equal sign. A single equal sign is used to assign value in JavaScript. It is used to assign value. Okay? It does not evaluate. It does not assess. It doesn't determine if something is true or false. It is incapable of doing that. It doesn't run any kind of evaluation or function. It doesn't check for things. It just assumes that the thing on the left is now equal to the thing on the right. And that is gospel as far as it is concerned. Okay? Now you can write an illegal function using a single equal sign, but the point is single equals is used to assign value. If I say A equals B, then now A equals B, even if it didn't before. A is now equal to B no matter what. I have made that a thing. A equals B now. On the other hand, when you see double equals or single equals, these are going to evaluate to true or false. For example, 8 equals 8 is going to be true. 4 plus 4 equals 8 is going to be true. 4 equals 8 is going to be an error. True. True. If we tried 4 plus 4 equals 10, this would return false. This would return false, and we can test this. Let's go into my console and give it a try. 4 plus 4 equals 8. I get true. 4 plus 4 equals 10. I get false. Okay, so these evaluate to true or false. What if I do 4 equals 8? I get an error. Invalid left-hand side in our assignment. So this 4 is invalid in this expression. I'm not going to worry about the meaning of that error just now. So the difference at double equals and single equals, triple equals, double equals and triple equals both behave this way. They evaluate to true or false. And this is important. You can also use them with strings, obviously. String equals string is going to be true. True equals true is going to be true. False equals false is going to be true. Okay, that's a confusing one. Not something you're usually going to run into too often, but point is, when you see double equals and triple equals, it will evaluate both sides of itself to a value of true or false. Does this one thing equal the other? So double equals and triple equals ask a question. Are these things equal? Single equals does not ask a question. Single equals puts its foot down and says, these things are equal because I say so. Think about when we declare a variable. Var name equals Evan. Well, now name equals Evan, no matter what. Name equals Evan. But I can change that. I can say name now equals Matt. Now name equals Matt, or name equals Chris. And now, if I call name is going to be Chris. Name equals Sam. Without forgetting my quotes. So that single equals is actually changing the value of name. It is changing the value of name. It's not questioning. It's not evaluating to true or false. It is saying, it is telling me, it is telling the browser, it is telling the world, name now equals Sam. Okay? The difference between double equals and triple equals is not too complicated, actually. 8 equals 8 is going to evaluate to true. But 8 triple equals, I'm sorry, I did this wrong. Let's try this again. 8 double equals, and I'm going to use 8 in string form, 8 inside quotation marks. This evaluates to true. Be careful there. Okay? This is a number and a string, and yet strings have what's called a value. They have an attribute that's a value of, and normally, let's try it this way. We still have name active in here? We do. So I can do name.valueOf, and it's going to show me the value of Sam, of name is Sam. Makes sense, nothing crazy there, but the same goes for any kind of a number in string form. And what that double equals is actually comparing is the content of that value with the content of the value of this one. And the value of both the number 8 and the value of the string 8 is 8. So as far as double equals is concerned, they are equal. True. But triple equals is going to search for strict equality, which means not only should the values be equal, but the type of data also needs to be equal. So 8 triple equals 8. A number can triple equals a number, sure, if it's the same number. 8 triple equals 9, false. 9 triple equals 9, true. 9 triple equals 9 in string form, false. 9 double equals 9 in string form, true. Okay, so triple equals is searching for strict equality. It requires that both sides of itself, both arguments, which is both expressions, which it is assessing, evaluate to the same value and the same data type. Number to number, string to string, apples to apples. Okay, and they also have to be equal in value. That's strict equality or the triple equals. As a result, most of the time you're probably going to find yourself using double equals, but there are absolutely going to be scenarios where you require strict equality. So it's just something to keep in mind. 3 logical operators. Here we've got and, or and. We've got or, and we've got not. Okay? These are usually used in if statements. That's where you're most often going to see them. And an and logical operator requires both expressions to return true, or requires at least one expression to return true. And not really assesses is one thing, not the other. And if so, it will return true. So it's like the opposite of double equals. So let's go ahead and try it out. Let's try it out in our console. I'm going to forgo the if part, and I'm just going to test some conditions. 8 is greater than 0, and 9 is greater than 0. True. The reason that's true is because 8 is greater than 0 is true, and 9 is greater than 0 is also true. But let's try it with minus 9. Then we get false. That's because 8 is greater than 0. Sorry, 8 is greater than 0, but minus 9 greater than 0 returns false. So we get true and false, which returns false. They both need to be true. True and true will return true. False and false will return false. Make sense? And requires both expressions to be true. Or is a little different, but probably self-explanatory. 8 is greater than 0, or minus 9 is greater than 0, will still return true. And that's because 8 is greater than 0 is true. And with or, we only need one side of this expression to return true. So minus 8 is greater than 0, or 9 is greater than 0 should be true. Minus 8 is greater than 0, or minus 9 is greater than 0 will return false. False or false. False. Okay? And not is pretty self-explanatory. I'm not really going to go into that just now. Especially since I've used up actually a lot of time on week 7. So let's push forward. What is the standard for loop syntax? For loop typically looks like this. We have for, and we have 3 arguments inside. For I equals 0 is the first argument. That I is our iterator. Okay, we call it the iterator. That's why it is most often seen as a variable I. Second argument, separated by a semicolon, is going to determine the scope of our for loop, or how many times we want it to run. So if we want our for loop to run 10 times, for example, then if I equals 0, as long as I is less than 10, we will run our for loop. Okay? Let's separate these just so they're easier to see. For I equals 0 is argument 1. I is less than 10 is argument 2. And argument 3 is going to be I equals I plus 1. And what that's going to do is every time we complete the loop, we're going to add 1 to I. Take a second and think about what we're doing here. I equals I plus 1. That's logic that we're going to be using a lot, not just in JavaScript in general, but specifically in this session. We are taking I, the variable, and we are setting it equal to the current value of itself plus 1. Okay? This isn't a mathematical expression. We are telling I that it now equals 1 more than it did. We are updating I. Think of it that way. That's how I think of it. That's how I find it to be helpful. We're updating the value of I here. Anyway, these are our 3 for loop arguments. We declare a variable I to be our iterator, set its base value equal to 0. We say we want to run the loop 10 times. And what we're going to do after each loop is add 1 to I. All of these things relate to each other in determining how many times we're going to run the loop. For example, if I equals 0, and we're adding 1 to I every time we complete the loop once, then how many times are we going to run the loop? We're going to run the loop as long as I is less than 10. As long as this middle expression evaluates to true, we run the loop. Okay? As long as that middle expression evaluates true, run the loop. When loop finishes, add 1 to I. And this just says I starts at 0. After those arguments, we have our curly braces, and this is the stuff we want to repeat. Do stuff repeatedly. Okay, we're going to get into for loops in a second. What is the standard function syntax? Pretty straightforward. We have the word function. We have the name of our function, decided by us. Parentheses, which may or may not contain parameters or arguments, followed by curly braces. Do this stuff when called. That's function syntax. Alright, let's dive into the exercises. I'm going to go through these pretty fast so we can jump into the later weeks where there's more valuable stuff to go over. Determine what variable type each one is. Well, test 1, it's a string. We can see the quotes. Test 2 is a number. Test 3, we see the square brackets. What does that indicate? An array. And it's an array of strings. Test 4 is false. Test 5 is also an array of numbers. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 5. Test 6 is a number. Test 7 is a string. We see the quotation marks. Test 8, true, it's a boolean. And test 9 is also an array that contains 1, 2, 3, 4 items, 1 string and 3 numbers. An array of 1 string and 3 numbers. Real fast, let's talk quickly about strings and arrays. Strings and arrays, I'm going to declare a string here, equals hello. Any kind of string and any kind of array have a property called length. Okay, and the length of a string is going to be HELLO, 5 characters, 5. The length of a string is going to be the number of characters contained in that string. Now if I declare an array, my array equals this is an array. If I declare an array, well then the length of the array is going to be the number of items it contains. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. The length of an array is going to be the number of items contained in an array. The length of a string is going to be the number of characters in that string. The number of characters in that string. And characters also include characters like space. If I change my string to be equal to space, hello, space, close quotation mark. Well then now, my string.length should be 7. Okay? Dot length. It's an important property of both strings and arrays. Okay, concatenation. Given these variables, what do you expect the console message to be? Well, I'm going to go ahead and just plug them into my console down here. Okay, we've got string 1 equals hello, string 2 equals my name is, string 3 equals your name here, and then we have a variable, combined strings, which concatenates string 1, string 2, and string 3. So what do we think this console log command is going to return? It should be hello space my name is space your name here. Okay, straightforward. Then we have var num1 equals 8, num2 equals 52, num3 equals 60, and var combined numbers equals num1 plus 2 plus 3, num1 plus num2 plus num3. What do we expect combined numbers to equal? It should be 120. That's because these are all numbers, so they add together. There's no string to stringify it. There's nothing to confuse us here. It's just 3 numbers. Added together, they equal 120. But then there's something like this, which is a little more confusing. We have mixed num1 equals 10, the number. Mixed string 1 equals 10, ten as a string. Mixed num2 equals 10, 10 as a string. And mixed concatenation equals mixed num1 plus mixed num2 plus mixed string 1. Let's see what that looks like. 1010 ten. If you're confused by this, it's usually because of one of 2 reasons. One, note that the mixed concatenation variable does not preserve the original order of these 3 variables. We have mixed num1, 10, plus mixed num2, 10 as a string, plus mixed string, the one in the middle, ten. So if that threw you for a loop, you need to pay attention to the order in which things are concatenated, or just in general, order in JavaScript can be pretty important. So it's something you need to pay attention to. You need to focus on the details. The devil's in the details. It will bite you in the butt if you're not careful. The other thing that might have thrown you is if you were confused by how mixed num1 and mixed num2 were supposed to combine. Remember, we have 10 as a number and 10 as a string concatenating. So what they do is they stringify. You get 10, 10. You can try that quite literally right here. 10 as a number plus, in quotes, 10, 10, 10 as a string. All right, if, else if, and else. Given these variables, num4 equals 5 and num5 equals 0, what do we expect the console message to be? Well, if num4 is 5, then is 5 greater than 1? True. So we should console.log num4 is greater than 1. And that's what we get. Let's jump ahead. Given the same variables, what do we expect the console message to be with these conditions? Num4 is less than num5, or num4 equals num5, and true. Okay, well, this needs to be taken step by step. First of all, how are these comparison operators, these logical operators going to evaluate in what order? Well, what's going to happen is we're going to check num4 is less than num5, or num4 equals num5. And that's all going to constitute the left side of this and statement. Okay, so is num4 less than num5? Is 5 less than 0? Well, that's false. Or is num4 equal to num5? Equal to num5. 5 is not triple equals to 0, so that's also false. We get a statement that says false and true, which evaluates to false. So we jump to the else statement, and we get the else statement ran. Next one, given the same variables, num4 is less than num5. Is 5 less than 0? False. Or num4 equals num5. Also false. So the if statement does not run. Both are false. Else if num5 equals 0 or true. Well, num5, 0 does not strictly equals 0 in quotation marks. Remember, this is comparing 0 the number with 0 the string, and it's using 3 equal signs, which requires strict equality. So that's false. But we have an or true statement here. So all in all, this evaluates to true, and we get the else if statement ran. Next one. Looking at a similar situation, num4 is greater than num5. Well, 5 is not greater than 0. 5 is greater than 0, so that's true. And num4 triple equals num5. That's false. So if statement is false, else if we have the same exact logic. We have this or true. And or true in an or statement always makes the statement true, because we only need one side of it to work, right? So the else if statement should run yet again. There we go. All right, now for loops and arrays. So before we dive into this, something else that we should discuss. Let me see if I still have my array defined here. I do. The reason why I'm so insistent on thinking of arrays as lists is because they do proceed in a numbered order according to their index or their place in the array. What I mean by that is we can target select items inside an array by referring to their numbered index. So I can write my array, and in square brackets at the 0 index, and I should receive this, the very first item in the array. If I write my array 1, I'll receive the second. 2, I'll receive the third. And 3, I'll receive the fourth. This is an array. Now, what if I didn't know how long the array was, but I wanted to find the last element in the array? This is another piece of common logic that we're going to be using a lot, probably, in JavaScript, and you, likely, in your careers. Well, if we don't know what my array contains, or maybe the contents of my array are going to be determined by a user, or are going to be determined by another developer at some later point in time, well, my array.length equals what? It equals 4, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4 items in the array, right? And what are the indices of all these items? We have 0, 1, 2, 3. And there's a pattern here. The last item in the array is always going to be 1 less than its length, no matter how many items are in the array. So I could guarantee that I'm going to target the last item in the array by using my array at the index of my array.length minus 1. And that will always return the last item in the array. No matter how long it is, no matter how many items I may add to it over time, this logic, this pattern, will always return the last item in an array. For loops then. Given this array, array 1, this is an array of strings. What do you expect the console message from this for loop to be? We have 4 bar I equals 0. I is less than array.length. I equals I plus 1. So we should get I, which starts at 0. Next time through the loop it's 1. Next time through the loop it's 2. Next time through the loop it's 3. So we should get one number, I, followed by the item in array 1 at the index of I. And how many times are we going to run this loop? We're going to run this loop as many times as there are items in the array, as long as I is less than array1.length. So when I is 0, we should see 0 and this. When I is 1, we should see 1 and is. 2, 2 and 3, 3 and array, 4 and of, 5 and strings. Then I becomes 6. 6 is not less than array1.length. 6 is actually equal to array1.length. So this statement returns false, and the for loop stops. There we go. 0 this, 1 is, 2 and, 3 array, 4 of, 5 strings. This undefined down here, don't let it confuse you when you see this arrow with a dot inside of it like that, this is not actually running. This has not ran, this is not actually logged to the console. It's just showing us a little bit of extra information there. So 0 this, 1 is, 2 and, 3 array, 4 of, 5 strings. All of these lines represent what has been logged to the console at a given value of I. Remember, the value of I changes by 1 every time we run through the loop. Okay, let's try the next one. Given these variables, var array2 and total, what do we expect the console message to be? Well, look at what we're doing with total. Total equals itself plus array2 at the I index. That should, hopefully, look familiar to the same pattern we're using with I up here. We're taking the value of total and we're updating it every time we run through the loop. Total equals itself, or the value of itself, plus whatever this is. Okay, and we're using the same kind of pattern. Var I equals 0, I is less than array2 dot length, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as long as I is less than 5. And we're adding 1 to I at the end of each loop. So when I equals 0, total equals 0 plus array2 at the 0 index, which is 1. So total should equal 1. Do we console.log it? Not yet. That console.log command is not inside our for loop, it's outside. So total equals 1. Now I equals 1. Total equals 1, its new current value, plus array2 at the first index, 3. So total is now 4. I equals 2. Total equals 4, its new current value, plus array2 at the second index, which is 5. So total now equals 9. I equals 3. Total equals 9, plus array2 at the third index, which is 7. Total now equals 16. I equals 4. Total equals 16 plus array2 at the fourth index, which is 9. 16 plus 9 equals 25. Total now equals 25. I equals 5. 5 is not less than array2 dot length, which is also 5. The for loop breaks, and we console.log the current value of total, which should be 25. And that's what we get. So as I said, for loops are the most complicated thing we'll be dealing with for a while, but they are essential. Hopefully they will get more familiar and you'll be able to internalize the logic that's happening over time, but it does take practice, and to that end I've got some additional exercises that should help us once we make it through these. And I'm going to work fairly quickly through the rest of them because they're all pretty much the same. Array 3, given this for loop, what do we expect the console message to be? Notice we have an if statement inside our for loop. That's an important thing that we're going to, that's a typo, that we do quite a bit. Check conditions inside of our for loop. Now let's try a simpler example before we dive into that one. Let's say I just wanted to console log all the numbers divisible by 2 between 0 and 10. Well, we'd have a for loop for var I equals 0. I is less than, what's going to be the scope? We don't have an array to use the length of, but we have a numeric range here. We don't want to go beyond 10. So let's say I is less than 10. But because we want to include 10, I'm going to do I is less than or equal to 10. I equals I plus 1. If you want, you can also write this exact same thing, I equals I plus 1, as I plus plus. And inside my for loop, I'm going to console.log. Well, if I did console log I, what should we expect to see? should expect to see all the numbers between 0 and 10, but we only want the numbers divisible by 2. And in order to do that, we're going to put an if statement inside of our for loop. If I mod 2 equals 0, then we're going to console log I. If you're not familiar with the modulo or modulus, this percentage sign here, what it does is it returns the remainder of something. So, for example, 10 mod 3 is only going to be 1, whereas 9 mod 3 is going to be 0. So if I mod 2 equals 0, that must mean that I is divisible by 2. I is divisible by 2, and if I is divisible by 2, then we can log it. That's what we're going to do. So if I save that, reload, we get 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Hey, well, I get a lot of students who say, why can't you just do I equals I plus 2, which is to say, why can't you just add 2 to I at the end of every loop? Well, that's true, you could. That's completely valid. But this only works if I starts at 0. If, for whatever reason, I started at 1, we would get only odd numbers, none of which are divisible by 2. So, a lot of times you might be dealing with a for loop where the base value of I is maybe dependent on something else. Maybe it's something that you get from a user. Maybe it's just not going to be 0, but you still need to log all the even numbers. This if condition inside the for loop logic just makes sure that no matter how you're incrementing I, you're always going to log only the values of I which are divisible by 2. Okay? Alright, so given all of that, what should we expect to see in the console here? If array 3 at the I index is greater than or equal to 55, or array 3 at the I index is less than or equal to 100, we're going to console.log the full array 3, and then the value of array 3 at the I index. Well, we don't really need to spend a whole lot of time evaluating this if statement, because this second half of it, as long as the value of array 3 at the I index is less than or equal to 100, we can see all of these are less than or equal to 100. So this is always going to be true, and because it's an OR statement, we only need one side to be true, which means this is going to run every time. We don't even need to waste time evaluating this if statement. So what we should see is array 3, the full array, so 11, 33, 55, 77, 99, and then the number of array 3 at 0, 11. And then we should see 11, 33, 55, 77, 99, 33, 11, 33, 55, 77, 99, 55, etc., etc. And that's exactly what we get. 11, 33, 55, 77, 99. This is array 3 here, and this is array 3 at the 0 index. Array 3 at the 1 index. Array 3 at the 2 index, etc., etc. And remember, how would we get the last number in array 3? Array 3 at the index of array 3.length minus 1, 99. Right, functions, making things happen. Given this function, and the way this function works is that AB inside those parentheses up there, those are serving as, think of them as placeholders. Placeholders for values which will be received when the function is run. This syntax, all this code down here, it's not running any function. We're just declaring a function. We're defining it. That's what this word function means, okay? We're just defining the function. And this A and this B in these parentheses stand as placeholders for values which we will receive when we call the function. And what we do with those values is we check, is A greater than 25 and is B less than 100? That's our if condition, and then we have an else. And we concatenate a message with those values depending on whether or not that if condition returns true. So for example, if we run this function, test stuff, with the values of 10 and 100, then we need to check, is 10 greater than 25? This returns false. What is 101 less than 101? Also false. This whole statement is false, and we should see console.log 10 is not greater than 25, or 101 is not less than 100. Okay, that's all we're doing. We're taking these two numbers, test stuff calls the function, and then we feed it two numbers to plug into its functional logic in place of these A and B placeholders. We can do the same for these other two versions of the function. Okay. I'm actually going to skip the other two, and instead we're going to create a couple functions which take an array of numbers and do things with it. So let's go ahead and just create a random array of numbers equals 1, 56, 98, 103, 546. So we have an array of 5 numbers, right? Well, I want to create a function which returns the total sum of an array of numbers. It's going to be a function which takes an array of numbers as an argument. Okay, create a function which takes an array of numbers as an argument and returns the total sum of an array of numbers, of the array. Total sum of the array. Okay, so we're not looking for the length of the array, we're looking for the sum of every number inside the array. So let's call this function total sum, and what we expect to receive when we call this function is an array of numbers. So for now I'm going to use a placeholder called numArray. That's my placeholder on which I'm going to run my logic. And what we need to do is run through every number in the array and add it to every other number. Or rather, add it to the previous number. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by setting ourselves up with a total variable equal to 0. And then we're going to run a for loop for I equals 0, as long as I is less than numArray.length. Notice I didn't use myArray.length, I used numArray.length, the length of my placeholder, because maybe my array is not going to be the argument taken by this function. Maybe it's a different array of numbers. I don't care what array of numbers it is, I always want to be able to return the correct total sum. So I'm using length of whatever array is fed in as an argument, and we're going to add one to I at the end of each loop. And what I'm going to do is total equals the current value of itself plus numArray at the I index. Okay, so if we use myArray, think of how this would work. When I is 0, we would get total equals total plus numArray at the 0 index, 1. And then total equals total plus numArray at the first index, 56. So total would be 57. Then total equals 57 plus numArray at the second index, 98. So numArray would be 165, etc., etc. And after we run through the whole loop, we're going to console.log the current value of total. Alright, so let's see if that works. Reload. I'm going to run total sum, call the function. I'm going to feed it the variable myArray as an argument. And it gives me 804. I'm going to take its word for it on that. But we can try it with any array of numbers we want. We can make one up on the fly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 15. And it's always going to return total sum. Let's try this with another example. Create a function which takes an array of numbers as an argument and returns the greatest number in the array. I'm going to call this function max. I'm going to use numArray as a placeholder again. And I'm going to start with a dummy variable called max, just like total, set it equal to 0. And let's do for I equals 0, I is less than numArray.length I plus plus. And inside of our for loop, we are going to check, is the current number in numArray greater than max? So that's going to look like an if statement. If numArray I, so 1 or 56 or 98, for example, is greater than max, which is currently 0, then max is going to equal numArray I. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Whenever numArray I is greater than max, we're going to update max to equal the value of numArray I. So first, if we were using myArray, is 1 greater than 0? Yes, so max is 1. Is 56 greater than 1? Yes, so max is now 56. Is 98 greater than 56? Okay, well, that's a dumb example because they all get, they're pretty much organized in from least to greatest. Let's go ahead and change that. Alright, that's good enough. We're going to check, is 144 greater than 0? Yes, so max equals 144. Is 56 greater than 144? No, do nothing. Is 98 greater than 144? No, do nothing, etc., etc., etc. And then at the end of our for loop, not after our if statement, but after our for loop, we're going to console.log max. Let's reload and run. Max on myArray, 144. And we could try it on a brand new array declared and created on the fly. So we should get 555. And there we go. It works. Okay, so this is both using function syntax and using for loops inside of functions and using if conditions inside of for loops. I understand that we move pretty quick and this is a lot of logic to absorb. It's okay if it's confusing. I would encourage you guys to go back and review these two exercises, maybe try them again on your own. They're really useful ways to demonstrate how for loop logic and creating functions with parameters and if condition logic, especially inside of for loops, can work and work together. So please do revisit these if you were at all confused by them. In the meantime, I'm going to push forward. That is week 7. Actually, I'm going to run to the restroom and take a bathroom break. So feel free to step away for a couple minutes. I will be right back. Alright, I'm back. I'm going to keep going. Sorry if that was tedious. It did take a while, but week 7 is always a bit of a slog. There's just a lot of fundamentals to cover, and it can definitely take a while to get through. But now that we're heading into week 8, now is when I can really start going off the reservation a little bit. So I'm not really going to go through all of the questions. Let's just start with some of the pretty basic concepts. Now that you've got the logic behind a lot of JavaScript problem solving, we need to get into more specific use cases and how you might rely on JavaScript to manipulate the DOM or manipulate your live HTML. And in order to do that, there's really two parts of manipulating the DOM. There's selecting what you want to manipulate. Select what you want to manipulate, and then manipulate it. Fairly straightforward, but how we actually do that can be complex. The very first means of selecting elements in the DOM that we learn in Codify is document.getElementById and an ID of intro. And what that will do is it will grab the HTML element with the ID of intro. Makes sense, nothing crazy, nothing unexpected. If I have a div, ID equals intro, that's what it's going to grab. Okay, and real fast, what we can do with that now is manipulate it. If I want, I could store this in a variable, my div, and use that variable name as a shorthand to always refer to, let me close that, always refer to this div. I can do that. So now I can do my div dot inner text equals hello world. This is me selecting it, and this is me manipulating it. I'll go over exactly what I'm doing in a second, but let's see what it looks like. And there we go. We get hello world printed into my HTML document. The difference between this and document.write is it's printed specifically into that div with the ID of intro. Okay? Dot inner text is a form of dot notation, which allows me to access the inner text property of my div, which, remember, is the HTML element with the ID of intro. There are plenty of properties like these which you can use to manipulate. I could have equally as easily done text content equals. I could also have done inner HTML equals. There are other dot notation properties. There are other methods that I can use on this div, but it's just, not text HTML, inner HTML, apologies. But we can see this will do the exact same thing. I can also forego using the shorthand if, say, I only need to do this once. I can just do this all in one line, and it will still work. No change, nothing unexpected. There are little differences between things like inner text and inner HTML. Let's take a look real fast. Inner text, let's say I wanted this hello world to actually appear like an H1 rather than just paragraph-sized text like that. Well, if I use inner text and I write in these H1 HTML tags, they're actually going to print as text inside that div. By contrast, if I use inner HTML, it's going to know how to interpret those HTML tags. And I can take that as far as I want. If I have a class, of red that changes the color to red, I can actually incorporate using that class inside the opening H1 tag inside this inner HTML value. and it should turn my text red. Something to keep in mind here is I use single quotes on this class name because I'm using double quotes on the outside of the entire string. That is something to stay on top of. You want to be consistent. If I use double quotes here, I would have had to escape them or risk confusing the browser. So that's document.getElementById. While we have document.getElementById intro stored in the variable myDiv, let's jump into my console and see exactly what myDiv contains. And what it contains is the div with the ID of intro, as we might expect. This is important though. It contains the single HTML element or node that I want to target. Now the next method of targeting elements is, let me create a couple more divs in my HTML with no ID, is going to be document.getElementsByClassName. We don't have any classes on our divs, but all you would need to do is insert the class name here. As for what it would return, let's take a look at the third method for that, getElementsByTagName. And here I'm going to insert div, the tag name, which I'm trying to select. Class name and tag name, they both behave exactly the same, so I'm only going to demonstrate one of them. But document.getElementsByTagName is going to return something different than document.getElementById. We store this in a variable called myDivs with an S. And notice it's getElementsByTagName as opposed to getElementById. Alright, so let's reload. Oh, need to comment that line out, sorry. There we go, okay. So once more, my div selects the one div with the ID of intro. My divs returns 3 HTML elements. 3 of them. 3 divs, 3 elements, and look at those square brackets. Okay, this is not actually an array, but it very much behaves like an array. For example, I can call the length property of my divs and tell that there are 3 HTML elements inside this collection. There's 3 nodes, all divs inside this collection. I can specifically target also, say, the first div in this collection, or the second, or the third. Okay, this logic is very, very important because oftentimes you cannot rely on document.getElementById to select the elements you want. So I could do it like this and keep my divs as a collection of HTML elements. Let's say I didn't want to do that. I could change this to my div, and if I only wanted to grab the first one using getElementsByTagName, well, I could follow this whole line with the index of 0. And now this variable, my div, is only going to contain the div which I want. If I want to be sure that I grab the element, the very last div on my page, well, I might do something a little different. Let's say my divs equals document.getElementsByTagName, and my div equals my divs at the index of my divs dot length minus 1. So there, no matter how many divs I might have on my page in my HTML, my div is always going to refer to specifically the very last one. How can this be useful for unordered lists or navigation bars? Think about it. There's lots of ways you can use this exact logic. Anyway, So those are the three primary methods for selecting elements from JavaScript. Document.getElement by ID, document.getElements by class name, and document.getElements by tag name. Now let's, I'm going to keep that class. I'm going to get rid of this ID, so it's just not confusing us. All we have are three divs. And let's say I want to insert this inner text in all of my divs. Well, this variable I don't need. All I have is the myDivs variable, which contains all three divs in my HTML. How can I make sure that this inner HTML, this h1, with the class of red, is inserted into all three of them? Well, I could give them all IDs and select them all one by one and waste my time and waste my code and write a lot of extra sloppy code if I wanted, but there's a much cleaner way to do that, and the way to do that is to incorporate for loop logic like we just were. So let me comment this out. What if we did a for loop for var I equals 0, I is less than my divs dot length I plus plus. And what I want to do is my divs at the I index dot inner HTML equals this. Well, now we've had the correct inner HTML inserted into all three of my divs. And if I want to create another one, we're going to see it there too. Okay, so this may not seem too useful, but what if this wasn't hello world with a red colored text? What if this was a particular formatting for every div on your page? Well, sure, you'd probably want to rely on CSS for that, but what if you wanted to create, what if instead, let's try something else. Let's say we had an array of students. There's going to be an array that just contains a bunch of names. Evan, Lisa, Nick, Adam, Matt, Chris, Sam, Brian. Okay, so we've got just an array of students, and what we want to do is we want to put every one of their names into an h1. Well, something that we're going to learn pretty quickly is how to create elements in JavaScript, but the way we do that is with document.create element. No, I got a better idea. I'm going to just create a UL in my HTML. An empty, unordered list. And all I'm going to select is var my UL, let's do students UL, equals document.get elements by tag name UL. And I only want the first one, so I can just do that. And let's change this to students.length. So it's now going to run this loop for every student that we have in this array. And what we're going to do is we're going to select students UL dot inner HTML equals itself. So its current value, which currently is nothing, plus students, plus, what are we going to do here? We're going to create an li plus students I plus closing li tag, and yeah, that'll do it. That'll do it. And let's in front of this li, let's do I plus 1 plus a space. And let's go ahead and see what that looks like. I'm missing a plus here. So much concatenation. Ooh. Well, that's not right. Let's go ahead and get rid of that I plus 1. There we go. Evan, Lisa, Nick, Adam, Matt, Chris, Sam, Brian. So we use document.getElements by tag name to select the one UL, the 0 index. And then we use for loop to update the inner HTML of that UL with itself plus an li containing the next student's name in the list. We did get a little off track though because that's not exactly what I was demonstrating before. So let's go back to our div example. Get rid of all this. And we are right back where we started. Okay. So while we're here, while we're on this subject, let's go ahead and go to the Google replica. Okay. Now, let's change, well, let's open up the console. I'm going to pull this to the right this time. So we've got plenty of room. And let's see how we can manipulate some of the things on this page. I can do var buttons equals document.getElements by class name button. Okay. And now let's do for var I equals 0. I is less than buttons.length I plus plus. And inside of our for loop, we're going to take buttons I, and we're going to use a set attribute function. I'm going to explain all of this stuff. And let's change the background color to pink. Did not seem to work, which means I did something wrong. Let's jump back into the console and see what happened. Oh, my buttons is empty, but oh, I used class name. Oh boy, there we go. Should be get elements by tag name. Okay, now let's run that whole for loop again. There we go. Now we have pink buttons. We can also try something even broader. Let's say var anchors equals document.get elements by tag name A. So all my A tags. And let's just use the same one. Let's do anchors.length, anchors at the I index, and I'm going to set their href equal to https://www.bing.com. Worst search engine in the world. Okay, so now all of my anchors should have their href attribute changed to point to bing.com. Hit enter, and first let's check in the Elements tab. Let's go ahead and select one of these anchors. Select male. And look at that, it's going to Bing. We can see it in our Elements tab. Let's check another one. Bing. Now every single link on this page is going someplace terrible. So let's see if I click on About. We're at Bing. Okay. So I've now dynamically edited the href attribute of every single anchor on the Codify Google replica page. Let's try it real fast with an image. This feels like a Greyhound day. So I'm going to find an image of a Greyhound, and I'm going to change the Google, oh goddamn, I'm going to change the Google image to the image of this adorable Greyhound. Okay, so I've got the image URL copied, and I'm going to go back into my console. Now remember, anything I do in my console is not going to stay. If I reload my page, all my changes are going to disappear. This is purely just for demonstration purposes. You would ideally write this code in your main.js file. But let's say I want to grab this Google logo here. Well, let's see if it has a class or an ID that we can grab. It does not. It does not. Okay. So we might have to do this a bit of the hard way. Let's do var images equals document dot get elements by tag name image. Now let's take a look at what images contain. There's two. Okay, one is the profile image of Chris up there, and one is the Google image. That's the one that we want. That's the one that we want. So I'm going to select images at the first index. Make sure it's the right one. Yep. Images at the first index. And just for consistencies, let's do set attribute. And I'm going to set the source attribute to the URL of my Greyhound. And when I hit enter, it changes. And it's a wonderful Greyhound puppy. While I'm here, I can also style it. I can set the style attribute equal to height 250 pixels. And we now have a Greyhound on the Google homepage. This is all using JavaScript logic and JavaScript manipulations. This may not seem like terribly useful stuff that I'm doing right here, but you can absolutely have code like this which corresponds to user input or user interaction, and that's what JavaScript is for. You can have your whole page change based on user interaction. You can have a user select a theme that actually changes which CSS style sheet you're using to style your page, and would change your page's stylings completely. And that's a very, very common feature. You can use JavaScript to hide and show elements on the fly, or to make certain elements transparent, or other elements more have greater visual contrast, make them pop out more. You can obviously do much more meaningful stuff with JavaScript by actually populating information on the fly and personalizing a user's experience. That's what it's all about. Okay, so take these principles that I'm showing you and experiment with them, apply them elsewhere. But anyway, now that we've gone through that, let's dive back into some of these exercises. Week 8 is all about objects. Okay. Group discussion questions. How would you print to the console 0 to 100 in increments of 5? Let's do that real fast. Actually, you know what? No, I'm going to stick with where I am. Okay, so we went over how to select the elements you want to manipulate. Get element by ID. Get elements by class name. Get elements by tag name. There are actually two other methods, which I'm not going to teach just yet. I'd rather you get familiar with these two. and then we manipulate it. And for manipulating elements from JavaScript, remember we have lots of options. We've seen me use the text content method. We've seen me use the inner HTML method. We've seen me use the set attribute method. Set attribute is actually my personal favorite. And for any of you who are not clear, an attribute is specifically anything like this. If you're using Sublime, it's anything that shows up green inside of an HTML tag. Okay, so an ID is an attribute. A class is an attribute. If you really wanted to, width is an attribute. But I would recommend against using width or height as an attribute in your HTML elements. You could just instead do style and keep it much more consistent with CSS practices. Something like that. Anything that shows up in green is an attribute. If you're dealing with anchors, a very common attribute other than href is target. That's what allows you to have a web page open in a new window. Target is a really useful attribute to change. Think about how you could, if you had a separate CSS style sheet, change the styles for your entire page. You could have a button which, when a user clicks on it, it changes the href attribute of your link in your head. And that is huge. That would have a huge effect on your entire page. A very common way of creating a low-tech image carousel is by manipulating the style or the source attribute of an element and looping through an array of image file paths. And if I get the opportunity, I'll show you that. So set attribute allows you to access any attribute, href, source, class, ID, and follow it with what you would like to set that attribute to. Okay. There are other useful shorthands. You could do .id equals for an element. Classes is one that I do want to go over. Jump into my console, get my divs. Okay, I'm going to grab the second div on my page, and I'm going to set its class name equal to, let's just set it equal to green. And now, let's take a look in my Elements tab at the second div on my page. Look at that, it has a class of green. It has injected green into the class. Now sometimes in JavaScript you're going to find yourself having to add classes to an element. And I see a lot of students using .className and not understanding what happens. So if I now say I want to add the class box, well, if I go into my elements, it has now replaced its entire class name with just box. So if you wanted to use this method, you would have to do something like green space box. So now it has a class of green and a class of box. But an easier and cleaner way is to select my divs, the first index, .class list. Let's just hit enter and see what that returns. It gives us a whole list of classes on that element. And I can do .class list, .add new class. And now, if I target the class list, it has 3 classes. And if we look in my Elements tab, green, box, new class. So this is also a very effective way of manipulating elements. And if I want, I can remove just as easily. Green and box. Okay? So there was dot class list, dot class name, dot add or dot remove, some of the other functions that you saw me use were inner HTML, text content, inner text. Text content and inner text are essentially the same thing. But we all know the difference between inner text or text content and inner HTML. Remember, inner HTML is capable of interpreting HTML tags in that inner text. Alright, now let's jump back into the group discussion questions for week 8. How would you print to the console 0 to 100 in increments of 5? For our I equals 0, I is less than 100. Let's do less than or equal to. I plus plus. Remember, I don't want to add 5 to I just want to keep things as professional and as clean as possible. So if, in increments of 5, if I mod 5 equals 0, console.log I. There we go. 0 to 100 in increments of 5, in numbers divisible by 5. How would you save a user's name not using prompt? It's a good question. Let's say I have an H1, enter your name, followed by an input element, type equals text. Let's do placeholder. Placeholder is also an attribute, your name here. Okay. Well, in order to store a user's name, in order to access a user's name, if I write my name in here, Evan, I need it to store somewhere. Well, you'd probably have a button that would run a function, but you'd still need to know how to handle that data. So let's start by document.get elements by tag name input, first one, 0 index. Okay, and let's see what the value of that is. It's nothing. But if I write my name in here, the value of it is now Evan. It's important to understand it's not inner text. That's nothing. The inner text of an element in HTML actually comes between these opening and closing tags. And in input, an input does not have a closing tag. Therefore, it does not have an inner text content or an inner HTML. Does not have an inner text, does not have an inner HTML. In order to access the text typed inside of an input element, you need to use .value, something you will be doing often. Let's change it to purple elephant. And once again, value has updated to purple elephant. So, to store a user's name, if I change it back to Evan, I could say var username equals document.get elements by tag name input at the 0 index dot value. So now if I call username, it has a value of Evan. And if I change this and call username again, it still has a value of Evan. So Evan has been successfully stored in the variable called username. Okay, that dot value is the real takeaway from that question. What are the 5 variable data types? Well, we know there's a number, a string, a boolean, and an array. And the fifth one that we're introducing now is called an object, also known as an object literal. Okay, and an object is defined is characterized by these curly braces. You see an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace around an object, and an object usually has multiple properties. Multiple properties. This is all one single object. Okay, I'm going to save this, and I'm going to try to access it in my console. Okay, my object, one object. One object which has three properties. This is not an array, it is not a list, it is not a collection of HTML elements. This is one object. Curly braces. Okay, the square brackets are for an array or a list. Curly braces indicate an object. What I can do with this object, though, is I can access specific properties. My object.name, my object.gender, my object.age. Okay, it works the same way as the .length property of an array. That's our dot notation at work there. Okay, that allows us to access a property defined inside the object. If I try to access a property that doesn't exist, like species, I get undefined. Okay. But what if I try to set the value of my object.species? Well, now we have added a new property on the fly to my object. Okay, and that can also be a fun thing to do. Sometimes you may need to add properties to objects using the same for loop logic that we've been exercising up to now. You might want to add a new background color property to every object in a given array. A lot of students ask me, how can I change the color of my background document depending on which zodiac has been selected in their Zodiac app? Well, that's one way to do it. There are more efficient ways, but that is one way to do it. Alright, moving on. This is an object literal, and this is the fifth variable type which we're introducing now. How would you store three sets of data, all with the same properties, but have different values? It's a bit of an awkwardly worded question, but let's say we have an array, or my array, and this array contains three students. One is Evan, and one is Lisa, and one is Matt. Okay, we have three students, three student objects stored in an array. Note that there's a comma after the closing curly brace between each object. That is important. If you don't have that, you will run into an error. In fact, let's see exactly what that error is going to be. I've taken out my commas. If I reload, I get an unexpected token curly brace error at line 36. You're always going to want to come into your console if your code is not working the way you expect. It's the first place you want to check for JavaScript errors. It will usually point you to where you need to look. So let's go to line 36. And it's because it's running across this new opening curly brace when it's not expecting to. It's not expecting to because we haven't prepared it to do so with this comma. Alright, now we have three students in an array called myArray. If I call myArray, three objects contained in an array. I can expand and see what each of them are, what their properties are, but that's what we're dealing with. If I want to access a specific object in the array, this will be Lisa. Lisa, female, age 9. My array at the first index. If I want to access specifically her name, my array at the first index, .name. I cannot do my array.name because there's no name property of an array, but there is a name property of each object inside the array. This is a relationship that you also should try to get a handle on if you're not feeling good about it or not feeling confident in it. Okay. All right. So let's say that we wanted to log the name of every student in this array to our console. How could we do that? Let's do for var I equals 0, I is less than my array dot length I plus plus. Let me bring all this code into view. And what we're going to do, I'm going to do this in my code actually. And what we're going to do is we're going to console.log my array at the I index dot name. And that will give us Evan, Lisa, Matt. And if we change this property to age, that will give us everybody's age. 898. Okay? You're going to be using this in your Zodiac apps if you have not already built them. And you're going to be using that dot value property of input tags in your Zodiac app if you have not already built them. That's object literals and objects stored in arrays. How would you display? I'm going to move on from that one. Exercises. All right. In HTML, make a div and give it an ID. Div ID equals intro. Using JavaScript, put some text into that element. Well, that's going to be easy now, knowing what we know. Document dot get element by ID intro dot text content equals hello world. And there it is. There's the text content injected via JavaScript. In JavaScript, create a variable and store a string inside of it. Using that variable, put that text into the above div. Var my string equals, this is a string. And what we're going to do, we're going to grab this, we're going to use the same function. I'm just going to comment it out. I'm going to set the text content equal to the myString variable, not contained in quotes. Okay, so it's going to, I'm setting it equal to the value of myString, which is currently this string. This is a string. What happens if I don't uncomment that first? If I don't comment out that first line, well, the text content inserted by this line gets replaced in this one. Okay, if we wanted to add my string to hello world, well, we would have to update the text content of this element, just like we do I. So, intro.textContent equals intro.textContent plus my string. And then we get them both. A little ugly, but we get them both. Okay? Create a function that takes a user's input value and then logs it to the console. Invoke the function, make it start when you click a button. So, excuse me. So we're going to create an input. I'm going to give this input a class, just for variety's sake. Placeholder name here. And I'm going to create a button. The easiest way to run a function on a button click is actually with an onClick attribute inside of our button. OnClick equals, and then the name of our function. Let's call it getInfo for now. I haven't created the function, haven't defined the function. I'm just going to call it getInfo. Let's see what our page looks like. Okay. Let's change this to insert username below. Okay. Let's define getInfo. Just get ourselves ready to define it anyway. Function getInfo, and let's set some variables. Let's set up some variables. Var input equals document dot get elements by class name. Because remember, I gave that input a class. I'm going to use that username, just so we can see them all at work. Username, and I want to grab the first and only one. For actually, we don't even need the button. That's it. Just our input. Get rid of this. Okay. So when we click on info, what do we want to do? We want to print the user's name to the console, right? Logs it to the console. Invoke the function when you click a button. So this function is going to run on click of our button. So what is it going to do? It's going to console.log input.value. So it's when we reload, nothing happens. When I type my name in here, nothing happens. But when I click the button, it logs it to the console. And it can do that again and again and again. What if we want to make this field reset when we click the button? Most input fields like this today, when you submit something, they actually empty. So how can we do that? Well, to do that, inside of our getInfo function, after we log the value of the input to the console, let's go ahead and reset the value of that input to nothing. So, Evan, click, and it's empty now. It has reset back to where it needed to go. So that's a little user-friendly tip. Most users expect that of input forms and form fields, so it's a good little trick to know. Create an array with 5 entries. Using a for loop, log each entry to the console. Okay, my var my entries equals A, B, C, D, E. For var I equals 0, I is less than my entries dot length, I plus plus. Console.log my entries at the I index. Oh, typo. This is what I mean though. Your console will tell you exactly what the error is and where it's located. I get a lot of students sending me code with very obvious console errors, and it's a waste of everybody's time for them to send me the code and then me to send it right back to them and say, have you looked in your console? And there we go, A, B, C, D, E. Okay. I'm always willing to help solve errors and fix issues, but you need to get into the habit of exhausting yourself trying to solve your own errors first. I know it's hard, I know you don't know where to look, I know you don't know the right questions to ask or the right way to search for solutions, but you do need to give it a try, and as time goes on, I'm going to be less forgiving of patently dumb questions. So, yeah. Once again, though, just to add an asterisk to that, always happy to help out. Okay. Create an object that has at least 3 properties and log each property value to the console. Fair enough. For my object equals, make it me again, name, Evan, comma between my properties, gender, male, comma, age, 8. Then I'm going to console.log my object.name plus space plus my object.gender plus space plus my object.age. Evan, male, 8. Now, Kruti, a while back you asked, why would we ever use null? I'm going to delete everything we have so far and embark on a kind of a different example. Let's say we had some kind of an inventory that we were tracking. Okay, and we monitored that inventory using objects. I'm going to create an array called, I'll just call it inventory. Okay, and each of these objects will be will just be our items of clothing. We'll just call them shoe or shirt, things like that. So we're going to have a name. Let's say they have a price of $12 and an in-stock value. And this is going to be 50. I have 50 shoes in stock. Then I'm going to do the same thing for a shirt, of which I have 20 in stock. And they're $8. And I'm going to have belts, which are $6, but I have none in stock right now. I have none in stock. Now, if I want, I could write this as 0, but this is just kind of an easier way to. This is just one of multiple ways to handle it, and this is definitely an example in which null might be useful. This is very simplified, a very simplified example. Bear that in mind. But once again, we have an inventory array with 3 objects, each of which has a property, name, price, and in stock. In stock is a property that represents how many of that item we have in stock. Currently, we are out of belts. What I want to do is take advantage of the fact that we have this property and use it. So let's say for var I equals 0, I is less than inventory.length, I plus plus. For every object inside inventory, if in stock does not equal null, then I'm going to, let's just create like a card for it. My div equals document dot create element. I'm going to do this real quick just to demonstrate. My div dot inner HTML equals inventory at the I index dot name plus, and let's do a line break, plus inventory at the I index dot price plus another line break, plus inventory at the I index dot in stock. And let's just make it a little more fancy. So I'll do inventory name in an H3. And price in an H6. And in stock can just be a P. Okay, so now this is going to, let's see if it works first. Line 20. If inventory I dot in stock does not equal null, after we do all of this, I need to append them. Document.body dot append child. Alright, so let's take a look. There we go. Nice and pretty. We have shoes and we have shirts. Nothing to write home about, obviously. Let me just give them a little styling so we can see it clearer. Background color, tomato, color, white. And text align, center. Alright, we've got shoes and we've got shirts. What we don't want is for belts to show up because we're currently out of them. Or if we did want them to show up, then we wouldn't want them to show up this way. We don't want to see null on our page, and we don't want to see 0 in stock. So we might even have separate logic that says something like, if inventory I dot in stock does not equal null, then inventory I dot in stock. I don't actually want to change the value of it, but we might change the message that presents. It might be something like, rather than in stock, we're just going to write currently out of stock right in here. Otherwise, else, we're going to do our normal method. Let's make sure everything's indented nicely. Okay, and now let's see. That's the opposite of what I wanted. Equals null. Pardon me. There we go. So now we have shoe, 50 in stock, shirt, 20 in stock, belts, currently out of stock. So this is one example where you might actually use null. And often objects in JavaScript, especially things like inventory or any kind of series data that you're tracking, they'll have lots of properties. Lots of properties. And lots of those properties might have values of null. Think about if you're an electronics store and you're trying to organize your stock on your website in terms of JavaScript objects. Well, not everything is going to be for the kitchen. So you might have a property for kitchen or kitchen appliance with a value of null. If you're an apparel store, you might have a men property and a women property, and one or both might be null. Maybe you have a unisex property and it's not null, or it is null. This is one example of how you might use null. In the example that I've given you, there is no reason why you cannot just say in stock is 0, and if inventory in stock equals 0, then write currently out of stock. It will do the exact same thing, but that's because this is a very simplistic example. dealing with larger sets of data or more complex properties, especially when properties relate to each other in some way, which we will see soon enough, null has a very deliberate usage. So I hope that helps clear that up at least a little bit. Okay, that's week 8. We don't have a whole lot of time left, unfortunately, but I do want to at least get through the class material for week 9. If anybody has any questions at this point, there's only 3 of you watching, so I'm not too confident there will be a whole lot of questions. Nevertheless, if you have any, please feel free to ask, and I'll go over them before we finish up. I will not evidently make it to week 10 this week. That's alright, I'll cover it next Monday. I hope this was helpful, at least a little bit. What is the JavaScript for creating an h1 element? Well, var my h1 equals document.create element h1. What does document.getElementById test.value mean? Explain in your own words. Well, that will retrieve the value of the element with the ID of test. If it is an input tag, that means it will return the text that has been written inside the input. If it's not an input, it could mean any number of things. I can actually apply a value attribute to any element in HTML. Okay, so if I tried to grab the value of this div, this is what I would get. But specifically, value has most use when it's used with input tags, or form tags, or any kind of field like that, editable by a user. What does document.getElementById test mean? Well, that grabs the element with the ID of test in your HTML document. Can you change CSS from your JavaScript file? No, you cannot. You cannot change your CSS. You cannot edit your CSS file or your style sheet. What you can do is add a style attribute to elements in your HTML, which can override existing CSS. You can edit certain CSS properties of your elements using a style tag, but it doesn't actually edit your CSS. It can simply override it. So you can absolutely manipulate styles of elements from JavaScript, but you cannot change CSS. No discussion questions. So straight into the exercises. In HTML, create a div tag and give it 2 classes. So I'm going to create a div, give it a class of box and tomato. In CSS, use one of the 2 classes to define the height and width of the div. Let's do tomato, dot tomato, and we'll give it a height of 300 pixels and a width of 300 pixels. In JavaScript, change the background color of the div to a different color. Let's see what we're dealing with first. We've got a box. So we need to select this div, and we probably want to use the setAttribute function to change the background color. So how can we select this div? Let's go through all the ways we've learned so far of selecting it. We can do document.getElementById, except we can't because it doesn't have an ID. We can do document.getElementsByClassName, and we could use box, or we could use tomato, or we could use both, but I'll leave it at box. And we would have to ensure that we're selecting the 0 index of the array-like list of nodes that this function returns. Okay. Or we could do the exact same thing, document.getElements by tag name div at the 0 index. Let's go with class name, just because it's got a class, why not use it? And we want to, I'm going to store this in a variable for now, my div equals document.getElements by class name box 0 index. Then I'm going to take my div and use the set attribute function to set its style attribute to a value of background color lime, and reload. And the background color of my div is now lime. To confirm, if we look in the Elements tab and select the element itself, we can see it now has a style attribute with a background color of lime. That's how this works. It injected a style attribute with this value into the HTML. Alright, in JavaScript, create a div and give it an ID. Let's get rid of my box tomato div. Clear out my JavaScript. I'm going to create var new div equals document.createElement div. Now, to give an element an ID using JavaScript, we can certainly use the setAttribute function, setAttribute ID intro. That totally works, and I would be very happy if you remembered that. But we can also do new div.id equals intro. Both of these are completely valid ways. I don't lean one way or the other. I prefer set attribute because it's more consistent. I don't like it when students rely too heavily on things like .id or new div.style.background color equals red or anything like that. They're completely valid methods, and if you want to use them, that's fine. But .set attribute is just universally functioning, universally clean, and easy to read, works well, and sometimes it can save you a lot. If you're changing a lot of CSS properties, set attribute is hands down a better way to go than .style.background color equals this, .style.color equals this, .style.font style equals this, etc., etc. So I've set the ID of my new div to intro, and then create an h1 tag and add some text to it using the text content property. var new h1 equals document.createElement h1. New h1.textContent equals hello world. Then add that h1 to the div. New div.appendChild new h1. Create another div and give it an ID. Before I do that, let's save here and see what we have on my page. We have nothing. Nothing on my page. And the important thing there is the reason why we have nothing on our page yet is because we haven't yet added anything to our body. We've created a div, we've given it an ID, we've created an h1, we've given it a text content, and we've now added the h1 to the div. But the div is still floating in space. It's floating in memory. It doesn't exist anywhere yet. In order to get it on our page, we would need to append new div, which contains new h1, to our body. Alright, create another div and give it an ID. Alright, var new div2 equals document.createElement div new div2.id for variety's sake, equals CTA. Create an H1 element, create a text node, add the text node to your H1, then add the H1 to your div. Var new H12 equals document.create text node. Goodbye. No, I'm sorry, I'm getting confused now. Create element H1 var new text node equals document.create text node. Goodbye. Okay. Add the text node to your H1, then add the H1 to your div. So new H12 dot append child new text node new div2 dot append child new H12. Let's stop there. Take a look at my HTML. Still have nothing. Nothing's in the body. Before we go further, I'm just going to append these to the body because it doesn't look like I actually have to in the instructions for the questions. Dot append child. Let's do new div. And then document.body dot append child new div2. Okay, there we go. This is not a great example of how you might use these features, but remember how we did use create element and append child in the case of the objects example demonstrating the use of null from a couple minutes ago. That might be a more appropriate example. Week 10 focuses exclusively on a more appropriate example with an e-commerce exercise, which I'll go through on my next review session. Create an image and a button tag, create a function that changes the image source and alt attributes when you click on that button. Well, it wants me to do this in JavaScript, so var image equals document dot create element image image dot source equals, where's that greyhound? There we go. This image dot alt equals Italian greyhound. Var button equals document dot create element button. Button dot text content equals click me. Button dot set attribute on click. Let's call the function change image. Sorry if this is getting confusing. The exercises for this week are a little iffy. Document dot body dot append child image and document dot body dot append child button. Down here, let's define our change image function, which we added in an onClick attribute to our button here. Function change image. I'm going to grab image and set its source equal to, let's find another greyhound. That'll do. It's a tiny one, but that'll do. image.source equals this, and image.alt equals another Italian greyhound. Okay, and while we're at it, let's create another h1. I'm not gonna store it in a variable. I'm just gonna do document.body.append child document.create element h1 dot text. No, I think I do need to store it in a variable. Alright, so var new another h1 equals document.create element h1, and then let's do another h1 dot text content equals image.alt, and then we're going to append another h1 to the body. How about that? Trying new stuff. Okay, so this h1, which we're appending, should also have its text content changed when we click on the button. And here's the alt of that current image, Italian greyhound, image, button, h1. When I click this button, it changes the image. Oh, but it didn't change this. So we may have to take this line of code and copy it inside our function. It's a nice little experiment. So now when I click, it changes. Okay. To get it to change back would take a little bit more code. If you wanted to try that out on your own, I would definitely recommend it. Alright, so now 442. We're through all the exercises for week 7 through 9. Unfortunately, I didn't get to 10. I know I owe you guys more in-depth discussions of the Zodiac app and the Comment app, but let me run through the Comment app really fast. The Zodiac app, I've already done a code-along video. If you'd really like to see it, you can send me a direct message and I'm happy to give you the link. Otherwise, I'd say please do code along, try and code it yourself as closely as you can, and I'm happy to help walk you through any problems if you run into walls. But let's go ahead and work through the Comment app real fast, since I tend to not spend a lot of time on that in class anyway. So the Comment app, it's week 9. This is what the Comment app should look like. It's got a field for username, a field for comment. I'm going to say my name is Evan. And this is a test. When I click on this button, it appends my comment down here. And I can do this as many times as I want. So let's go ahead and get myself set up in my index. I'm going to create, let's just do everything inside of a main. I have an h1, just says comment below. Below that I'll have an input, type equals text, give it an ID for username, placeholder equals username, and then below that I'll create a text area element, placeholder equals comment. See what we have. Okay, we've got our input and our text area. And just to speed things along, okay, that'll do. Buy that for $1. What we want to do, we need also a button. We need a button. Button. Type equals button. Submit. Okay, and let's give it an on-click attribute. Append comment. not going to worry about styling it right now. So in our JavaScript, we need to define append comment, right? This is the function that we want to run when we submit our comments. I give my text area an ID of comment. Okay, so we've got an input with an ID of username, a text area with an ID of comment, and a button with an onClick function. Let's define some variables. Our username equals document.get element by ID username. Var comment equals document.get element by ID comment. And inside of our function, what are we going to do? We are going to take username.value. We're going to do something with that. We're going to take comment.value, and we're going to do something with that. What do we want to do, though? Let's go ahead and create a new div to contain our comment. Document.create element div. And inside that div, let's also put a new h2 document.create element h2 and a paragraph to contain the actual comment. Document.create element p. And new div.append child, new h2, new div.append child, new p, document.body.append child, new div. Okay, but before we append new div, we want to take new h2 and set its inner text equal to username.value. And we want to take new p and set its inner text equal to comment.value. Okay, let's refresh and let's give it a try. Username is Evan. This is a test. And it works. Obviously, it could use some serious styling, but it absolutely works. If I wanted to add additional text in here, I could do what the demo did and put username :space before username.value and comment :space before comment.value and concatenate them. So this is a test. I get username Evan, comment, this is a test. Right, this is one perfectly valid way to do it, and the way that you are advised to do it for this week. A different and, in my opinion, more efficient way to do it is, let's create a new div. And I'm just going to do this all in one. New div dot inner HTML equals, and this is going to take some planning if you try this method, equals h1 plus username.value plus closing h1 tag, opening p tag plus comment.value plus closing p tag. And then document.body.append child new div. And it works. And obviously, if you want to, you could again add things like username, : and comment, colon, and it will behave exactly the same way. The advantage of this is it's just a little bit cleaner, and if I wanted to, I could also go in and insert a span in here around username, so maybe it wasn't quite as big as my actual username. So now both username and comment are contained in spans, and I can come into my CSS, and let's say I want my spans to be italic, and I want them to have a font size of, it's too small. Let's try that. Okay, just another way to go. But in my opinion, this is a little more efficient in terms of your code, but it does take some planning, and you need to be careful using .innerHTML, because if at any other point I use .innerHTML on the same element, it's going to override everything inside of it. So to quickly demonstrate, let's see if I can still select new div. No, I cannot. Well, let's do it this way then. I'll just do document.body.innerHTML equals all my stuff goes away. It rewrites all the inner HTML of, in this case, my body, to contain nothing but the value of this string. So, how could we actually use inner HTML rather than append child? Well, we could do document.body.innerHTML equals, remember, we're going to be updating it, not writing over it. Document.body.innerHTML plus new div. So now we're not even using append child to actually append a new element. Let's see if it works. Evan test. Oh, that didn't work. Sorry, guys. We need new div.innerHTML here. That's why. One last time. Evan test. And there we go. It even reset my fields for me, which is a nice little plus that I hadn't anticipated. Here's another test. But that doesn't work because new div is not, the inner HTML new div is not actually updating. Okay, so there are some problems with that method, but I bet there's a way to do it. Anyway, that's what JavaScript is all about, trying new stuff, trying to find the most efficient method of accomplishing something. Go ahead and review this video, review some of the for loop exercises at the beginning especially. If you had trouble with the comment app, hopefully this will help you break through that wall. This code is the code you should be focusing on, unless you've already blasted through it and you want to try this second method down here, in which case do it. See how clean and efficient you can make it, but as long as it's working, then we'll be happy, and you should be proud of it. So, if you have any other questions about JavaScript, there's a lot, of course, that we didn't go over, and there will be a lot that I'll be going over in my next, probably 2, reviews of JavaScript before we finish out the course material and move into Vue.js. So, watch this again, write down your questions, come to me if you're having any issues, come to me if there's something you don't understand, and I'm happy to explain further. Otherwise, I'll see you guys again later, and I hope this was helpful.